Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going way back in time to the Book of Ecclesiastes.
Ecclesiastes.
Yeah. Um, it's a fascinating book of wisdom, really is. All about uh, time, purpose, all that good stuff.
Right.
Well, the blog post that you sent over, it takes these like age-old ideas and connects them to, get this, protests and social justice.
Wow.
I know, right? Wild.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting combination. I mean, you've got this ancient text, and then you've got modern day protests in Israel. You've even got music thrown in there.
I know, it's going to be a fun one.
Really shows how these like big questions that we all have, about time and meaning and all that, they're still relevant.
Totally. So let's jump right into Ecclesiastes chapter 3.
Okay.
This is where it lays out this whole concept of a time for everything.
A time for everything.
Have you heard the lines, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted?
Oh, yeah, I've heard those.
Yeah.
Very familiar.
It's pretty powerful, right? I mean, just how it resonates
Yeah.
across cultures, across history.
Yeah, definitely. And what I find really interesting is how this blogger connects that to his own experience with protest and government corruption.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. He's adding like a time for protest to the list. It's like even in a world that's supposed to have a time for everything, there's still always that need to push for change.
To act against injustice.
Exactly.
So speaking of connecting ancient wisdom to modern times, this blogger brings up Pete Seeger's song, Turn, Turn, Turn,
Oh, yeah.
which is basically Ecclesiastes chapter 3 set to music.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's like Ecclesiastes went viral hundreds of years before the internet.
I love that. That's great.
We'll have to put a link in the show notes. There's a great version by Bruce Springsteen and Roger McGuinn.
Definitely. Okay, so this is where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
The blogger brings in this contrasting perspective from an Israeli poet, Yehuda Amichai.
Oh, yeah, Aptichai.
Yeah, have you ever read his work?
Yeah. His poetry is so powerful. Like, it really challenges Ecclesiastes' view of time. It's like, in Ecclesiastes, it's all about time being structured. Everything has its place.
Like almost compartmentalized.
Yeah, exactly. But Amichai's saying, no, life's not like that. It's more like everything's happening all at once.
So much more chaotic.
Yeah. He actually writes about needing to, hate and love at once.
Wow.
And make love and war and love, intense.
It's like he's saying, hey, Ecclesiastes, your theory's nice and all, but life is messy.
Yeah, totally. It's messy, it's chaotic, it rarely goes according to plan. He's got this really vivid image, actually. It's like that drawer in your kitchen.
Oh, I have that drawer.
We all do. You just shove everything in there, like utensils, batteries, takeout menus.
Oh, yeah.
It's overflowing, it's a mess, but somehow it all works, right? That's kind of Amichai's view of life.
I love that analogy.
It makes you really question the idea of a perfectly ordered world, right?
Absolutely. So which perspective speaks to you more? Is it the more structured view of Ecclesiastes or this more chaotic vision that Amichai has?
That's a tough one. I mean, maybe it's somewhere in between, right? Like we try to create order and structure, but then life happens.
And it's messy.
Right. And we have to kind of roll with the punches. Embrace the unpredictability of it all.
I like that. So getting back to this blog post, the author brings up God's role in all this.
Okay.
He points to the verses in Ecclesiastes that say, God makes everything beautiful in its time. And finding joy in your work is a gift from God. What do you think about that?
It's interesting because there's this tension here, right? Like on the one hand, you've got this image of God creating this world where everything is perfect, it's ordered, it has its time and place. But on the other hand, you have this emphasis on God seeking out those who are suffering.
The oppressed.
Exactly. So it's like saying that even with a divine plan, things can go wrong.
And that there's a need to address injustice.
Exactly. It's like divine justice isn't passive. It requires action, like God stepping in, disrupting the status quo. Pretty powerful idea.
Yeah, it is. It's really, really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about this emphasis on the joy in work as a divine gift. How does that fit into this whole picture?
Maybe it's a way of saying that even in the midst of all this chaos, all the injustice, we can still find meaning. We can still find fulfillment in what we do every day.
Like finding that sweet spot between making a difference and finding contentment in the present moment.
Exactly. And that actually leads us to the next section of the blog post, where the author looks at good and evil.
Oh, okay.
The struggle between light and darkness.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. He brings up an Israeli rock song.
A rock song.
I know. We'll get to that.
Okay.
But first, let's unpack these verses about wickedness existing in places meant for justice.
Mm.
What do you make of that?
Mm. Well, I think it's a reminder that the world isn't black and white.
Right.
Systems that are designed for good, they can get corrupted.
And fighting for justice is a process. It's not like a one-and-done thing.
Exactly. It's ongoing. And that's where the blogger brings in the Book of Job. That story about why bad things happen to good people.
Right. Right.
It seems like the takeaway is that even when things are really bad, we have to keep fighting for what's right.
And to illustrate this point, he brings in this song by Shalom Hanoch called Violence, and it actually uses lyrics straight from Ecclesiastes.
Wow.
I know. So he's got ancient text, modern poetry, folk music, Israeli rock. He's weaving it all together.
It's pretty impressive.
It is. It is. It speaks to how timeless these themes are.
Yeah.
So before we move on, what stands out to you so far? Are you leaning more towards the Ecclesiastes view, or are you more with Amhan?
I think it's fascinating how they both can be true at the same time. Maybe it's not really about choosing one over the other.
Right.
But like recognizing that order and chaos both have a part in life.
I like that. Yeah, it's like finding that balance.
Right.
Accepting what we can't control, but then also trying to change the things we can. But how do we even do that when the world feels so overwhelming?
That's where I think this blogger's insights are super helpful.
Okay.
He reminds us that even with all the craziness of life, there's still wisdom in focusing on what we can control.
Cool.
Like finding contentment in our work and being okay with not knowing what the future holds.
Okay, I get that.
Yeah.
But it's so much easier said than done.
Yeah.
Right? Like you just want to fix everything, fight every battle, solve every problem.
Oh, totally. And it's exhausting. It can be paralyzing to think that way.
Yeah.
And that's where I think both Ecclesiastes and Amichai have something to offer us. Like Ecclesiastes reminds us there's a time for everything.
Right.
There's a rhythm to life. We can't be on all the time. We need rest too.
So it's like pacing ourselves,
Yeah.
picking our battles.
Exactly. And this is where Amichai comes in. He reminds us that life is messy. Things aren't always neat and tidy. Like sometimes we have to accept things that seem like they contradict each other, Like it's okay to feel happy and sad at the same time, angry and hopeful. Like it's all part of being human.
I feel that. It's like, life is complicated, but you don't have to get lost in all that.
Exactly.
But how do we do that? How do we stay present and aware at the same time?
The blogger seems to think that finding contentment in your work is a good place to start, Focusing on the task in front of you, doing what you can with what you have.
Okay, so like finding purpose and meaning in everyday things.
Right, like even if it's just cooking dinner for your family or finishing a project at work.
Right. But what about those big issues that we can't just ignore? How do we choose which battles to fight? I mean, we can't fix every problem.
Oh, yeah. That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's one right answer. But maybe that's the point. Maybe just asking these questions, reevaluating what's important to us, that's just as important as finding the solutions.
So it's like the journey matters more than reaching some kind of end goal.
Yeah, I think so. Like just being present, making good choices, knowing that those choices might change as we grow.
It's like Ecclesiastes and Amichai all over again.
Yeah.
Acknowledging the ups and downs of life, accepting that it's messy.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about finding that balance, between trying really hard and just letting go, between taking action and being at peace.
It's like we're taking all these different things and weaving them together, like making something beautiful and meaningful, even if it's imperfect.
I love that. Yeah, and maybe that's what we can learn from all this. It's not about having all the answers. It's about finding that balance between pushing forward and surrendering.
Between order and chaos.
Exactly. You said it perfectly. And maybe in that process, we learn something about ourselves, something about where we fit in the world.
I love that. Okay, so as we wrap up, what about you, dear listener?
Yeah, what do you think about all of this? Have you made any connections with Ecclesiastes?
Or Amichai? Let us know.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. And remember that main takeaway, find contentment in your work. Focus on what you can control and be okay with not knowing everything.
Simple, but really powerful message.
It is, yeah. It's like we don't have to have it all figured out, We don't have to control everything.
And in letting go, we open ourselves up to new possibilities.
To new joy.
To finding the beauty in everyday life.
It's like taking a deep breath and just letting go of all the stress.
Just being. It's pretty amazing, right? We started with Ecclesiastes and ended up talking about protests and folk music and Israeli poetry and even rock music.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild ride.
Yeah, who knew that time could be so, I don't know, diverse.
Well, it just shows you how these questions about life and purpose, they've always been around, you know? People have been wrestling with them forever.
Yeah. And we're all still searching for those answers, right? Trying to figure out what it all means.
Exactly. And for me, what's really stuck out is this idea that even when things feel chaotic and uncertain, we can still find some peace, some purpose.
Yeah, by focusing on what we can control,
Right.
finding joy in what we do.
And accepting that we don't know what the future holds.
Right. It's a theme that keeps coming back, doesn't it?
Yeah. From Ecclesiastes with the whole rhythm of life thing to Amichai and how messy life can be.
It's like we're being told to let go of needing to have everything figured out.
To control every little thing.
And when we do that, we open ourselves up to so much more.
Yeah. To new possibilities.
Maybe even some joy.
Yeah, exactly. To seeing the beauty in the everyday.
Right. It's like taking a deep breath and just letting go of all that tension.
And just being.
Just being. That's a good place to end, don't you think?
It is.
So, dear listener, if we can't address every challenge, how do you choose what's most important to you right now?
In this moment. What speaks to your heart, your mind, what's calling you?
It's a big question.
It is. And it doesn't have an easy answer, but maybe that's okay. Maybe the answer isn't some big plan, but just listening to that little voice inside you.
Following your intuition.
Right. It's about trusting yourself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we encourage you to think about that question. What really matters to you? And what can you do to actually live those values, to follow those dreams?
Even if it's just a small step.
Trust yourself.
Embrace the journey.
And remember, even when the world feels crazy and unpredictable, there's something bigger connecting us all.
A rhythm, a heartbeat.
And maybe if you listen closely enough, you can find your place in it, your purpose.
In this big, beautiful mess we call life.
That's perfect. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful.
And maybe even a little inspiring.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the beauty of it all.